What's up, and welcome to the Week 9 edition of the Occupy Fantasy Football Podcast, the NFL DFS edition. FanDuel and DraftKings advice for this upcoming week. I'm your host, Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, joined again this week by Chris Rooney, our NFL Daily Plug main slate writer. What's up, Chris?
Brian, how you doing? Happy to be here once again for another appearance on the Occupy Fantasy DFS podcast. Ready to bury the tape on week 8. Personally, it did not go well for me, but week 9 is one that hopefully will go better for sure.
Let's hope so. An early look. It looks like an ugly slate, and we'll discuss here as we talk about teams in high total spots, teams in big favorite spots. We'll talk about highest owned players at each position. We'll talk about some sneaky stacks. And, of course, at the very end, we'll discuss recently underperforming and soon to blow up wide receivers. If you're listening to this on YouTube, be sure to click that subscribe button to be notified when our latest videos are available. And if you're listening to this in podcast format, subscribe in your favorite podcast app for all of our newest episodes to be delivered directly to your feed. All the data we take here is from OccupyFantasy.com or Occupy Fantasy model. Memberships as low as $2 per week. Access to our daily plugs, our write-ups for each NFL main slate and showdown slate, as well as our real-time player dashboard, the Occupy model. All right, Chris, as we like to do, we look at things from a sky-high level view and teams that are favored by a lot in the highest total games of the week. So starting out, looking at games with bigger favorites, and no double-digit favorites yet on the main slate, unlike what we've had in the past couple of weeks. The biggest favorite so far, Chris, are the Bills minus 9.5 versus the Skins.
Yeah, and I think, I'm a little surprised. I don't want to give away too much, but I'm a little surprised we don't see any of these Bills players on offense in the early run as some of the highest projected owned players on the slate, because great matchup for Josh Allen, great matchup for John Brown, who's been his, favorite target on the year, and then obviously Cole Beasley as a value play. I would think a lot of people would gravitate towards plugging these guys into their lineups, given the high spread and just how bad Washington has looked all year. But it doesn't seem like most people are actually trying to do that here based off of the early information we have to look at. But, I definitely think that doesn't get me off the spot here. I think the Bills should have a nice day on Sunday.
Yeah, what about Singletary? Now, do you think, and again, I haven't read too much this week as far as what the coaches are saying. Still, we're recording this Wednesday evening, but Singletary doubled Frank Gore in snaps and opportunity last week. Do you think that was more game script based, or are they really going to get him more involved down the stretch here?
Yeah, I know you saw this as well. A couple of our writers or your writers, I should say, that talk about NBA, they're Eagles fans from Philadelphia, and they watched obviously that game intently as a result, and they kind of suggested to us that Singletary was in there because Buffalo was trailing. So I don't know. I hate giving an answer of I don't know, but it's better than making something up. And
Yes.
I do think if this game is close, there's still a real chance Frank Gore gets all the red zone work, all the touchdown equity down there at the goal line. So we both, I think, agree that Singletary is the better athlete, the better player here, but it's really hard to forecast him getting enough work here to be worth it, at least in cash games. I think he's a good tournament play.
Yeah, that's definitely true, and we'll have to monitor practice reports and what beat reporters are saying here throughout the week. All right, Chris, some high total games. Maybe not teams you would normally expect to see in this section, but Tampa Bay and Seattle right now has the highest total, 51.5. Detroit and Oakland, 50.5. Then there's a tier down. We have Green Bay and the Chargers at 47. We have Houston and Jacksonville at 47. We're still waiting on Minnesota, Kansas City because of Patrick Mahomes' availability. But Chris, what are your first thoughts here as far as the highest projected total games go?
Yeah, I think the total is definitely going to tip it this way, but that Buccaneers and Seahawks game probably going to be the most popular game for stacks, and it's just because I think we talked about this a little bit last week with the Tampa Bay Titans game. Tampa Bay is a very hard team to run against, only allowing 68 yards to their opponents on average. So that means Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, fire those guys up. They're going to probably have a big day. And then on the other side, with the Tampa Bay Bucks, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, they seem to trade massive weeks, week in and week out. And that seems to be where most of the targets in that offense are concentrated. There's not much to be said for any of the running backs really on this roster for DFS purposes. So very easy to build lineups using those three players I mentioned from the Seahawks, and then mixing in one, if not both, of those Tampa Bay receivers on the other side. But I love this Detroit Oakland game. I think it's going to fly under the radar, sandwiched right in between, the one I just talked about, and then this Green Bay Los Angeles Chargers game. I think people will be drawn to some more of the quote unquote marquee quarterbacks that'll be playing in those two other games. So maybe Detroit and Oakland is the one that everybody forgets.
I like it. And as we talked about last week, Houston and Oakland feature two teams that really don't generate a lot of pressure versus the quarterback, and that's normally a good predictor of fantasy success at the quarterback position. And Detroit was also on that list when they faced the Giants, and now Detroit and Oakland match up together. So we have another low pressure game, high total. I'm with you. I do like stacking this game as well. And as we kind of transition here into the highest owned players, we talked about Seattle and Tampa Bay, and Chris just once again reinforces how sharp DFS players are here in 2019, because Russ Wilson hasn't thrown for more than 250 yards in the past 2 weeks, hasn't thrown for more than 2 touchdowns, yet he's projected to be the highest owned quarterback on the slate along with Aaron Rodgers. Uh, we generally don't like advising people to pay a ton at the quarterback position in low risk lineups specifically.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about those two guys being the highest projected owned guys.
I mean, we'll get there in a second, but I don't even understand how either of these guys project so highly at their salaries, especially with some of the pricing at running back this week. But I mean, I certainly get the matchups. I mean, these guys are in great spots to succeed, and I don't have a problem playing either one. Definitely think they're both going to be successful here in week 9. But why don't we move on to that running back position? I mean, we usually like not messing around here. We know, I mean, you mention it all the time. These high-owned running backs are high-owned for a reason here in NFL DFS. People have, a full 6 days to really kind of dive into these matchups, these games, look at the advanced metrics to figure out who they want to play based off of all the trends that are available for them to look at. And we have a $10,000, a 5-digit price running back, Christian McCaffrey on DraftKings, 9,700 on FanDuel, but he is, despite the price tag, projected to be the highest owned running back on the slate on both sites. Man, can we him in low risk, Brian, even at this salary?
It's going to depend. If Jalen Samuels is the lead back for Pittsburgh, he's 4,000 I think on DraftKings. If James Conner misses that game, that'll be a big key to the slate. If we can fit him in, then I think it makes it a lot more likely for us to be able to jam in Christian McCaffrey. And 10K is a ton of money. Literally 20% of your cap on one player. But he probably should have been priced at this point almost all season given his usage. So I don't mind the price tag. We're back in pre-injury Todd Gurley days, some Le'Veon Bell days, who got up to 10K there on DraftKings. So it'll be tough. I mean, it'll be tough.
He's definitely lock buttoned into our featured section for running backs in the daily plug. So I'm certainly not pulling him out, but that is definitely the only real thing here. I mean, credit to DraftKings for making this a little more difficult of a choice for people with that pricing, but definitely is still hard to avoid him based off of the work he's been seeing for sure. Other high-owned running backs that we have here in the Occupy model in the projection for our members, we have Nick Chubb on the road as a favorite against the Denver Broncos. Normally a tough spot going into Mile High for opposing teams, but do you like Nick Chubb this week?
Yeah, I was kind of curious to see him being one of the highest owned guys. But I guess, he faced the Patriots last week, ran really well, had the 2 unfortunate fumbles. But the workload is safe, at least until Kareem Hunt gets back. Denver's defense not too daunting. Favorite. Chubb and as we talked about in our season-long episode, Brandon Allen starting for Denver, so it should be limited possessions for their offense, I would imagine. Many more chances for Nick Chubb, so I like it. He joins Dalvin Cook, Chris Carson as other guys that are going to be highly owned, projected here on Wednesday evening. And again, the projected ownership in the Occupy model changes every day up until Sunday. Remember, Latavius Murray last week was 5 to 7% projected, and then Sunday morning turned it out to be 50 or 35% projected. So just one final point here is whoever ends up being the highest owned guy Sunday morning are guys you want in your lineups. It's really that simple. Moose and I did some analysis on profitable 150 max GPP players this past week, and the position where they over leveraged themselves the most with popular players was at the running back position. It makes sense. It's very
Yeah.
projectable volume. These guys are in good spots. So if the most profitable players in the world are doing it, you should probably be playing high-end running backs as well.
Yeah. And this is just probably a good spot to actually address that phenomenon too, because, last week was the prime example, fresh in everybody's minds, where, Alvin Kamara ruled out late Saturday night. So that Latavius Murray spot opened right up. This is probably just a good lesson for everybody to learn. Pay attention to the inactives that come out on Saturday night. We're doing the best we can to post that stuff for you on our respective Twitter feeds in the Daily Plug. But just as a general rule, when you have a high favorite team at home that has their high priced normal starting running back ruled out less than 24 hours before the game, you can probably assume it's a safe bet that that backup running back who instantly gets a bigger role is going to be one of the most popular players in the slate.
Yep, 100%. Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, Chris. High owned receivers, 3 from that Seattle Tampa Bay game: Lockett, Evans, Godwin. We talked about stacking them. There's a reason those guys are projected on Wednesday to be some of the highest owned the position. Kenny Galladay makes an entrance here as well. I'm curious to see, because Chris, if you try to fit all these guys into one lineup, you can't do it. So I'm curious to see what receivers in the lower price tiers end up becoming higher owned. Any early thoughts on who that could be?
Yeah, I mean, I do have some early thoughts, and I think I was sharing some of these with you today. And I know the exact word that I think you used was that these players were gross. So I think Preston Williams with the Miami Dolphins, with his workload, is probably going to be looked at by a lot of people. He's just 4,200 DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. We project him for 7 targets here in that game. So obviously that is great volume for that price tag, especially on DraftKings, where it's PPR site. And the other one that I keep going back to is Cole Beasley. I mean, this for Josh Allen, I know that he has, it's been kind of talked about at length that he has accuracy issues, but he does have these 2 receivers that he seems to be pretty focused in on in this offense, in Beasley and John Brown. So just because Beasley is 4,100, comes in 2,000 less than John Brown. If you can't afford John Brown and you want to go with some Bills players in your lineups because of that big spread, because they're home favorites, I think Cole Beasley makes sense.
Yeah, good points there. And yeah, again, trying to jam in guys like Preston Williams and Cole Beasley feels disgusting. Like you need to shower after you make your lineup. So
Yeah.
I get it. I get it.
You're,
At tight end though,
you're,
with tight end we do have some more prominent names: Darren Waller, Travis Kelce. Again, these are really expensive guys. So given McCaffrey's price tag, given the popular quarterbacks, I'm curious to see how this ownership shakes out over the next few days, because you're not going to be able to fit all these guys in. So any tight end thoughts, Chris? Waller, Kelce, any other low price guys?
I mean, Kelce is playing a ton of snaps for this team, over 90%, and getting all these red zone targets and not converting them into touchdowns. And I know the quarterback's different, but this just cannot stay this way, right? I mean, he has to have one of these ceiling games at some point, and I can't imagine that the Vikings are going to be the team that is going to be the one that he breaks out against. But with the way Travis Kelce is using this offense, I mean, he's capable of breaking out against any opponent. This is not a player that I want to get cute with and fade because of matchups or anything like that. I think now that his price has come below $7,000, I think that this is more in play, and I think it's a great play, quite frankly. And then obviously Darren Waller with Oakland's second highest team total on the slate, implied team total. Waller is a super safe play for these Raiders. He's been involved heavily all season. So definitely think both these guys make sense here, and I'm comfortable playing either one.
Yeah, even Kelce finally scored last week, and it was not on a red zone target. He's still scoreless on his red zone targets this year. So, like you said, that's going to change pretty quickly. One quick note before we move on: highest projected owned defenses this week. Two defenses that are in really different situations, and they're in the same game. The Bills and the Redskins, as of Wednesday, are projected to be the highest owned defenses. Chris, the Bills, because they are the biggest favorite on the slate, 9.5 points against the Redskins. But the Redskins, because they are super cheap on both sites. I believe 3,000 on FanDuel, 1,800 on DraftKings, which we've seen defensive pricing floors come down on both sites. And I think especially facing an offense like Josh Allen, who can be turnover prone and take some sacks, it makes sense to pay down if you're, especially on this week where we have really expensive players in good spots.
Yeah, again, I kind of think I already did this once, but once again, credit to DraftKings for getting a little more creative with the defensive pricing this season, dropping that floor below 2,000, because I think it has opened up some more opportunities for interesting lineup constructions. And I guess, marrying two of our dashboards together, both the quarterback model page and the defense model page, we see a decent pressure percentage from the Washington Redskins. They're generating, it looks like, 27% pressure. So it's actually kind of a spot where, I already talked at length a little bit about how Josh Allen has been inaccurate in the NFL, really all throughout his football career, going back to college. So, with defenses, you're not worried necessarily about the amount of points they give up unless the game gets out of control. You want to focus on the opportunity for those defenses to generate some sacks, maybe force some turnovers and score touchdowns. And I mean, that's probably why this ownership is a little higher projected beyond just the low salary. It does seem like there actually is an opportunity for Redskins defense to put up some points here.
Yep, I totally agree there, Chris. All right, before we move on, a quick reminder for those of you listening, the Occupy Fantasy Discord channel is now live.
Mm-hmm.
Subscribers to the Occupy Fantasy Twitch will receive access to our Discord channel where members can chat with each other about DFS lineups, strategies for the upcoming week for all 5 major sports that Occupy Fantasy offers. So if you're interested, and if you have Amazon Prime, it is free to subscribe to us on Twitch. Go to twitch.tv/Occupy Fantasy to subscribe and get access to our Discord channel. All right, Chris, a section that we like to talk about each week, sneaky stacks. You and I both know that Tampa Bay and Seattle will be popular. Detroit and Oakland will likely be popular. We'll see where Minnesota, Kansas City ends up. But any under-the-radar stacks that you're looking at this week?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not committing to necessarily advocating for this one in the plug, but I like this Colts and this Steelers game on Sunday. The total is okay. It's only 42.5 points right now, but both quarterbacks very cheap. And then especially if James Conner misses this game with his shoulder injury, and it gives us that Jalen Samuels play at just 4,000 on DraftKings. I mean, you're going to be able to get a ton of these skill position players on both sides for really affordable prices, and that allows you to, again, pay up for some of the better players on the slate overall to fit around them. So this is a strategy that I have been trying week in and week out, and I'm hoping that it hits at some point. But I do think if we can leave more than half of our salary available to play some of the better players on the slate while doing one of these heavy 3-1 or 3-2 stacks from one of these games that's on the lower end of the salary range, I think that can probably take home a big prize for sure.
And you're definitely right this week. Just a quick glance for me, trying to work in some stacks. It's nearly impossible to stack a game fully, especially some of these higher total games, and be able to fit in those really good running backs. So you're going to have to get creative here. Again, haven't dove in depth into this just yet, but if you're a fully stacking high risk type of player, 3, 4, 5 guys from the same game, it's going to be really difficult, and you have to find some cheaper guys to go with it. Jacksonville Houston is a stack that I like. It's in that second tier of games where you generally get a little bit lower ownership, and I think that's reflected by the highest projected ownership guys that we talked about. Fournette continues to somehow not score touchdowns. I saw today that he should have 7 more touchdowns than he actually has so far this season based on his usage. He has 1 touchdown on 198 touches. So eventually he'll have a big game. Hopefully it's in a game that I stack. So
yeah, I'm not. I don't know. I mean, I love this game. I totally agree with you on that, Brian. I'm actually not sure it's on the slate. I think that's the 9:30 game in London. So
you were right.
I'm just looking at the DraftKings main slate, so it's not available to you on DraftKings. I'm sure that there's places out there where you can play this game, and so I definitely think it's a great point that these players can go off, but you're going to need to find a slate that actually offers this game to be able to stack it up.
Incredible preparation on my part, talking about games that you can't even play on the main slate. So
it's that secret millionaire maker setting, right, where you can add in all the top plays that nobody else can get to. I totally understand. It's a sharp call by you.
It is, yeah. So if you win the DraftKings Million, they actually give you a lot of different settings where you can actually change your players after lock. You can change your lineups after the game's end. It's really incredible. I suggest everyone try that out. So on a more serious note, let's get to, we actually had a listener ask us about this section specifically this week. So here it is. Underperforming wide receivers. There are many, models out there that predict receivers to blow up based on recent usage. And while we can't get exactly close to the most famous wide receiver models out there, by looking at opportunity, we can get pretty damn close. So, Chris, I'm going to name some guys this week who, over the past 3 weeks, have seen a ton of opportunity, air yards, target share, total percentages of their team's passing game. And I want to hear it. I'm going to run off the full list of guys to look at this week in high risk contests. You let me know some guys that stand out to you, all right?
Absolutely.
Again, we have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams at the top again this week. Just massive volume. Mike Williams got 149 air yards again this week. Just an incredible amount of volume for him. Other guys that are on this list: Zach Ertz, Preston Williams, Scotty Miller. You may be asking who that is, and we'll get to that. David Moore. Some real superstars here. Noah Fant, Curtis Samuel, Cortland Sutton, Robbie Anderson, Christian Kirk for this Thursday game, and a couple who just missed the cut. Some tight ends in Mark Andrews and George Kittle, who's also playing on Thursday night. And then we have Odell Beckham and DJ Moore. So lots of potential names this week, Chris. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, the first one, I mean, it's the first one you named that jumps out, is actually Keenan Allen. And it looks like in the early projections on DraftKings, he's actually the Occupy model's favorite receiver main slate and the fourth best so far on the FanDuel side. So obviously we like that. A little bit of confirmation of the opportunity here. Model very sharp, knows that Keenan Allen is in a good spot here against the Green Bay Packers. And then, obviously his teammate Mike Williams has actually, I think, led the team in air yards the last 4 or 5 weeks. So either one of those guys would be good. The other one, though, is Zach Ertz. I mean, he was the tight end that you mentioned, and I noticed DraftKings dropped him below 5,000. He's only 4,700. Now, I know that's probably because of the Dallas Goedert factor, and Goddard's been more involved since returning healthy to the lineup. But Ertz is still seeing a decent amount of targets, 6, 7, 8 per game or more, and just not necessarily converting those into the fantasy points we want. But if he continues to get the opportunity, eventually he will. And against the Chicago Bears, I mean, it is a great matchup for tight ends. I like looking at Football Outsiders DVOA. Zach Ertz matchup, they're only 20th against tight ends. So definitely a good spot for both Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. That's probably why the ownership projects a little lower for Ertz, but I think I'll play a lot of him in tournaments for sure based off of this opportunity.
Yeah, great call there. I love that insight on Ertz. And again, the perfect storm here for high-risk contests is we have these guys on this list who are expected to blow up, and they check in at like 5% or less ownership. Chris Conley sticks out. We talked about him in the season-long episode. He was in this exact same section last week. It checked in at 0.8% ownership in the Millionaire Maker. Went off for 100 yards and a touchdown. Those are the types of plays that really shoot you up the leaderboards. So, Chris, two guys that stood out to me were guys that, I don't think we've said their names once this year. Scotty Miller and David Moore. I'll let you talk about Scotty Miller if you have any insight at all, and I'll talk about David Moore if you want.
I think it's really thin playing any Bucs receiver not named Mike Evans or Chris Godwin, quite frankly, but I do think that there has been some real displeasure, at least among Bucs fans on Twitter, with Brashad Perriman. I mean, he was the receiver responsible for running into his own teammate at the goal line and tackling him, blowing up a 3rd and goal play in Week 8. So I think great play there by Perriman. So I think the thesis here is maybe Miller potentially rotates in more as the 3rd wide receiver, gets some looks near the goal line potentially in this game, which is one of the highest projected Vegas total games. It's the highest projected Vegas total game on the slate. So I guess there's some opportunity for Scotty Miller here, but to be completely honest, I just haven't really looked at Scotty Miller too much. We'll probably have some more thoughts on this by Friday when the Daily Plug comes out. Not in on Scotty Miller really.
That's fair. That's definitely fair. But like you said, in this high total game, if you are stacking this game, Scotty Miller, perhaps a way to get away from, Evans and Godwin. But again, he had 1 target last week. We'll have to see how Brashad Perriman, if he's demoted whatsoever. David Moore is the other guy in this high total game who actually got 20% of the targets last week for Seattle, 22% of the air yards. But Russ Wilson only threw 20 times, so his final box score didn't stand out. If he's forced to throw more in against Tampa Bay, perhaps David Moore is another sneaky passing game option if Russ Wilson has a volume game. So lots of guys that we listed here. They'll be listed in the Daily Plug. A lot of these guys will be seen at the top of the Occupy model in the wide receiver section. The Occupy model is built for tournaments specifically, and a lot of these underperforming receivers end up showing up high as a result. because of that. And if you want access to that, to this daily plug, the full list of players, OccupyFantasy.com. Memberships as low as $2 per week. You get 3 NFL write-ups. You get the NFL Occupy model, and then you also get access to all of our other sports as well. Chris, any final thoughts on this upcoming DFS slate? I know your final thoughts will be in the daily plug Friday evening, but any other early thoughts that we should consider?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the top of the show, we said that this kind of at first glance looks kind of an ugly slate, but at the same time, I think that means that this is a good opportunity for us to find success in our tournament lineups. If we find it difficult, then that means everyone that's building lineups also finds it difficult. So we can use the tools like the Occupy model and some of the things we've learned throughout the season about how these players are being used to really separate ourselves from other DFS players and hopefully have some more success here in week 9. So honestly, I'm excited for the challenge and looking forward to it.
Yeah, like you said, if it's challenging for you, it's challenging for others as well. For me, I'm the millionaire and I have the settings where I can change salaries too, so it's a little bit easier for me. But for most folks, everyone's in the same boat. And if, like you said, if you find it hard, literally everyone else in the same position,
Right.
it's going to be hard for them too. So, that's really some good context to think about when you're looking at
Right.
the upcoming DFS slate. So that'll do it. Chris, thanks again for joining me. For those of you listening, remember to subscribe on YouTube if you're watching the video, seeing our pretty faces. And if you're listening to this, you can't stand our faces, you're just listening in your podcast apps, be sure to subscribe there too. Daily Plug will be out Friday evening, and Occupy Model is updated and will be updated through Sunday's games. For Chris, I'm Brian. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.